Hello and welcome to another episode of the Thunderstock Show. This is a collection of valuable brainstorms to enhance your life, liberty, and pursuit of property. Today's special guest is Rachel Platt. She's out of the greater DC Baltimore area. She is with PLATTinum Consulting, intentional play on words, love that, and has a career in navigating the human side of HR. Don't think about compliance and paperwork. I wouldn't want to bore anyone with that, nor myself, but it's really managing humans, relationships, and energy. Can't wait to dive into this. Rachel, it has been the number one most important issue for owners and business people to solve is having those tough talks. And hopefully we have a pretty fun one today. How is it going and what is it like in your area, the neck of the woods today?
Hi, Ross. Great to be with you. Happy to report that it is sunny and the pollen count is going down. We're recording this on a Friday and life is pretty good all around. I hope everyone else's is as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love this time of year. Not only is tax season all but over, not that I, work in accounting, but it's the springtime. And let me ask, it probably near graduation for college people, so the labor force gets a fresh new cohort of people to enter. Speaking of which, I'm sure when you were growing up, you didn't say, I'm going to start PLATTinum HR Consulting when I get older. So what was it that you wanted to do when you were going through school, around this time, maybe thinking about post-graduation?
It's a great question. I actually have a son who's graduating in 3 weeks. And so it is very top of mind, all those new grads. Back in the day when I was graduating, I started out as an accounting major, speaking of accounting, and then migrated to and somehow found my way into recruiting as my first job. And initially, I really was thinking about it as selling opportunity to people, helping people to find the role that was going to give them the opportunity to live whatever their best life was. I was not a great agency recruiter because it was all about the sell and the money. And I was way more about, wow, how could this person have an impact? How could this job have an impact on their life? What are their aspirations? So when I moved into corporate HR pretty rapidly, really found myself drawn to just the human stories, what it took for people to be successful at work, what an organization could do to boost someone's spirit, empower them to do better work. And pretty quickly, I found that human resources was my thing. And the VP said to me, "You are in the wrong job in recruiting. You need to be on the people strategy side." And that's where I went ever since.
For some people, hearing that from someone in the organization that you're in the wrong job might come as sort of a braced shock of, oh no, this is bad news. But I think knowing more about you and later in your career, these conversations are meant to be helpful for everyone. So, what are some of the experiences or early memories you have of navigating tough conversations? If this is one of them, I want to learn about that.
It's such a great question. So I have two philosophies about feedback. One is, as the individual receiving feedback, feedback is fuel. Feedback is something that can either, and I guess we probably should clarify, feedback is not always negative feedback. It is not always feedback that something needs to be redirected. Feedback is also positive feedback. So for all leaders out there, you want to be giving feedback. You want to be giving positive reinforcing feedback. But side note, back to the story, is feedback is fuel. So either let feedback bring out your passion, whether that's your passion to prove the person wrong,
Yeah.
Your passion to learn, to grow. I mean, feedback should be an individual's opportunity to learn about themselves, about what the organization expects, about what their supervisor needs more of. It's just the fuel to skyrocket your career. That's what it is. And if you look at it through that lens, even if it's tough feedback to hear and it requires a shift in your performance, in your behavior, in how you're doing things, just really thinking about it as fuel um, really can reframe that for individuals. The second is feedback is a gift. And you're smiling and you're nodding, which makes me think you've probably heard that expression before. But the reality is nobody comes to work every day wanting to do a bad job. And
Right.
so when somebody takes the time, when you as a leader take the time to tell someone, either I really appreciate that you're doing this and you are specific and detailed with it, or, you're doing that and the impact is XYZ, and we really can't have that. And here's what we want to see more of. That's a gift that someone is giving you. And so take that gift and, again, use it as fuel. And if you are a leader who's giving feedback, or feedback can come from anywhere, your peers, your subordinates, at any level, everyone can be a leader. But if you're giving feedback, give it in the spirit of it being a gift.
A couple things I want to unpack from that eloquent and insightful answer. Maybe it'll be in the form of a story. I had once received feedback that at the time was so emotionally just made me tilted. I was not happy. I was angry. I was defensive. I just, early in your career, felt like a hit to my pride. But like what you said, and what I think is rule number one of entrepreneurship is use what you got. If you have negative feelings, turn them into motivation and prove that person wrong, right? You get to write your own story. And some of the feedback I received was, oh, well, I don't respect your opinion, Ross, because you've never owned a business before that's employed people. Or I don't, or, oh, well, you're not ready for this challenge, even though your numbers and your performance says so, because you're too young. And I've taken that feedback and I thought, okay, well, one, can't change the two facts that you said. But since then, I've gotten more gray hair in my beard. I've employed dozens, probably 100 people by now. Okay, well, I proved you wrong. Thanks for the motivation.
Thank you.
But then later in my career, I heard something. I was getting feedback from a board of advisors, and one of the people said something. He goes, "When you do something well, don't let the positive feedback get to your head and think and blow up your ego. Right? You don't want to have the biggest head in the room. That doesn't help anyone, especially doesn't help yourself, even if you do something well. So don't take the positive so personally that it drains the energy out of everyone around, which was helpful. I probably was guilty of that sometimes, thinking I was better than I was. And number two was, and he said this, and he goes, but also, what do I know? He goes, take every piece of feedback with a grain of salt, because everyone giving you feedback is doing it from what they know of the situation, and it's an incomplete thing. So the grain of salt is, you don't have to accept the gift for what it is. Accept it with the intention that they're trying to give you feedback, and like you said, with positive intent to be helpful. Even the most harmful feedback could be given with positive intent to try, and it might be wrapped in ugly, like newspaper, ugly wrapping, and it might be a flaming bag of dog doo-doo. But if you assume with positive intent, it's easier to receive or say no thank you.
I think you are absolutely right. And there have been so many times when it was, that boss that I referred to who was like, you are in the wrong job. And that was a kick to the gut because I
Yeah.
thought I was doing really well. It was just that they saw something different in me that I didn't have the experience or the exposure to see in myself. And so that turned very quickly into a positive. I think like everybody, we all have received feedback that we can think back and you just years later, it still hurts. It still makes you feel bad. And I know that I have been in that situation. I've had people say to me, something that I thought was a strength, which is I really like to build relationships with people. I like to understand them. And, an executive told me that I was spending too much time trying to make this other very difficult human like me.
Mm.
And I was like, what? How is that? That really hurt. Like that I'm overshadowing and I want to be liked so badly. Well, no, I want to be respected. I want to be able to influence outcomes. So it's not about like a popularity contest. I was so offended. I mean, I was like brought back to middle school.
I'm
But
not laughing with you. I'm laughing at you because I
yeah,
know the
gosh, I could
feeling.
break out in hives just like sitting here and talking
Hmm.
about it. But there's so much to learn from that after I got over myself, basically, and really said, okay, what do I think that they were trying to say to me? And a skill that I learned the hard way, but a skill that I learned when I came from feedback is going back to someone afterwards and saying, okay, you said this, it hurt. Here's how I heard it. Here's what I think you meant by it. Can we just like make sure that we're actually saying the same thing? Make sure that I heard the same thing. And, I'm a big believer from an HR perspective in the stop, start, continue model, which is, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it's a great tip. Just talking about what things can I start doing to either improve my performance, get back on track, help the organization? What things do I need to stop doing? Either they're no longer priorities or they're driving people crazy. And what things should I continue doing? What do you value? But back to that story of going back and really kind of recalibrating what I thought I heard and where I was being perceived as going off track, and really working hard not to defend myself, saying, no, I don't want to be liked. I'm just trying to establish enough of a relationship so maybe this person will listen to me.
Right.
The reality was, and I'm sure like this was the truth for you also, like take it with a grain of salt, as you said, because you've got to be who you are. You be you, as the kids say these days. You be you.
Sure. No, but it that's a phrase that makes sense, and I think it's true universally. I'm nodding and I'm thinking along about your start, stop, continue. And as someone that spent years and years going through EOS training and working with implementers, one of the tools from EOS that rings a bell is it's called the one thing. And when you're giving feedback, you start with, here's the one thing that I admire about you and appreciate about you. And everyone goes around in a circle. And it is by far the most uncomfortable tool, I think, for across the board for executives and leaders to have to do is be open, honest, vulnerable.
Yes.
And sometimes it's harder to receive positive feedback because you're so braced for issues and negatives. That I've seen people, and I'm guilty of doing this because I really liked it. What my love language is positive affirmations, is words of affirmation. I've seen people be driven to tears by receiving positive feedback
Feedback. Yes. Yes.
because they don't hear it.
Often enough. No. Imagine the impact that we could have on our relationships at home, with our friends, with our family, on the relationships that you could have in the workplace if you actually stopped and called out when you saw something positive, even a quarter of the time that you actually see it. How much confidence, trust. I mean, we want you to be authentic about it,
Yeah.
but the impact that we could have on our businesses and better outcomes is tremendous if we spent more time giving people positive feedback.
And we talked about something that is just absolutely in the back of my head, need to share. Difference between being nice and being kind. Difference between being liked, being respected. And then after you give the positive feedback, going back to the EOS tool, is you give the start, stop, continue.
Yes.
And you have to, the key thing is I have to look you in the eye. So right now we're in the camera, but pretend I'm looking you in the eye here, Rachel. Looking in the eye. And I have to say your name. Rachel, I want you to continue being you. Because, one of the biggest compliments you can give another human being is addressing them by their name.
Yes.
I think. And then by eye contact, it shows that you're engaged, you're paying attention, you see them, you're
Yes.
in the moment. And then it makes it a lot more digestible to give the criticism or the negative feedback, which
We
is
call
more
that
constructive.
redirecting.
Yeah, redirecting. But it's easier to be braced that way when there's that tone of respect and positive intent. And I have found that 95% of the time that I've been in those exercises and I've been in those, the feedback that I thought I was going to get was way worse than the feedback I actually got. It wasn't that bad.
Yes. Yes. I'm not a huge fan of like this feedback sandwich model where it's like a positive and then the thing that needs to change and finish with a positive.
Right.
But that's the difference between being nice and being kind a little bit. So being nice is about your comfort. Being nice is playing to ego and wanting to be liked. Being kind is giving actionable, meaningful input that is based on fact and observation. That's what being kind is. People can't change if they don't know. Now, they may not choose to change. They may not, but that's a different issue.
But knowledge and will, right? So if I can't
Will and
change,
skill, you got it.
you can't change if you don't know.
Yes.
But that doesn't determine if they will or will not change. They definitely won't change if they can't. But if they can, maybe they will.
Correct. If they know about it, if they know that it's driving you crazy, people are more inclined to try. Or if it's not getting them the results that they're looking for and they want different results, you want to get promoted, you want to be selected for this opportunity, you want whatever it is that motivates you. Oh my goodness. Tell me the thing that will help me achieve that and let me see if I can do it. It may or may not align with my values. It may or may not align. I may or may not agree, but at least if I know, I can make the choice.
I think it's more selfless to be kind.
Oh, it definitely is. It's harder to be kind because you can't fall back on, I've built up your ego so much. I mean, we want to be considerate, compassionate, empathetic, all of those things, but being kind is the magic. That is a superpower, is giving real caring about someone else enough to give them this input that you have. It's dramatic.
The story you said of when you received that feedback that maybe this recruiting seat isn't the right one for you, in hindsight, could have been kind of kind because that redirected you into the journey that you ended up being today, which is pretty darn awesome with being human resource officer and being VP and then, having platinum HR consulting look, I don't never say never, but the chances of that happening, if that conversation didn't happen, are lower than the fact that it did happen after. That
Absolutely.
might have been an integral milestone.
I think that it was. I mean, I thank that person regularly, and I don't want to actually claim how many years it has been, but I am one of those lucky human beings that almost every single boss I have had since I graduated from college, I am still in touch with. I could pick up at my very first corporate boss. I could pick up and I could text him today, and it has been, I mean, I just told you I have a kid graduating from college, and that child was not born immediately upon my own graduation. So you can do some math here. And it's been a really long time. And so I have been so lucky to have so many incredible bosses, mentors, sponsors, champions who either gave me the wings to fly on my own or set me on a path and told me that I could do it, and gave me the confidence. They empowered me, and I am so thankful for those who saw something in me that maybe I didn't even imagine for myself. It's incredible.
Going back to phrases that the younger generation uses that I think apply to the conversation is love your haters. So when you have that initial response of, this hurts, this feedback hurts, like we talked about, and you might think that this person is just a hater, right? If you don't analyze it, you don't take it with positive intent, you don't receive the feedback as a gift. But when I look back at my own story and I think of the people that have said things, I mentioned one story. There's another one. A boss was potentially not happy that I was cavalier and taking the system that he wanted me to follow and making my own to try and get better results, which the test that I did ended up being successful. But the fact that I went against the edict and was cavalier was not appreciated. And he made a comment. He's like, why don't you just start your own thing if you want to build? And I'm like, it took me so long to internalize that and be like, he's right. Like he saw that I had an entrepreneurial DNA before I did.
Yeah.
It wasn't an insult. It wasn't an angry thing that it was personal, like a bad thing. It was just a thing that was a missed redirection. And I wish I would have listened to him sooner.
It is so true. You started this off by saying, we're not going to talk about policies or compliance. Look, some of that is the foundation of. I have always been on the people strategy mindset. And what that means, that is really the projects, the initiatives, the way of relating to people that moves beyond compliance. I've had so many bosses who have said to me, you're just not very good at the black and white and following the rules. I live in the gray. Okay. Humans are fascinating. And HR, people strategy, there is art and there is science to it. And I'm just a little chemist in the background trying to figure out what's going to work for this particular situation to have the most significant impact on the business. And so I believe in living in the gray, and not everything needs to be, you need to be compliant, you need to be legal, but you need to be professional and kind and all the things that we've been talking about. So yeah, those are gifts that we get.
Talking about people strategy and unlocking human development, I want to share a quick story. I watched a brief documentary. I love sports. I was an aspiring professional fighter at one time. You can't see my ears, but if you could, they're pretty mangled. And this documentary is about the coach of the year, the gym of the year for 2024. And what was fascinating is there wasn't one head coach, there were three. And the way they framed themselves, this is impactful for HR and leadership development, was one is the mastermind, or the one that coaches their mind. So that's like the technique and the processes, the heuristics, the training, the mental skills, like getting your mind ready. One was for your heart, which was to get you to be resilient and tough, and to get you to be conditioned physically and emotionally that you're ready to perform, right? That's a EQ, IQ, EQ.
Yes.
And one was the spirit. And his goal, and I'm loosely quoting, was to make someone believe that their spirit was the capacity for their soul to grow was higher than they even thought the ceiling could be. That where they are today, or they came from, if they came from a rundown side of town from across the tracks, or a favela or the ghetto, they could end up being champion of the world. And by getting people to believe that in their soul, and preparing their mind and their body to do it, that camp within 2 years of entering the organization became the organization of the year. And I've never heard that approach before, but I think it's prescient to what we're talking about today, where it's like bringing your whole self, and don't change who you are, just identify who you are.
Yes.
And try and optimize and maximize it, and put yourself in the right team, in the right situations, getting the right feedback, and understanding that, like you said, feedback is a gift, but don't waste the gift.
Yeah. It's funny. I've heard it used in a different way. And sometimes the spiritual doesn't feel right to certain people in the workplace. So there's a lot of work around your head, your heart, your hands. So like, what can you do? What can you make to make it better with your hands? What actions can you take right now? Your head, what do you have to learn? Your heart, how can you build relationships, everything that you said, you are spot on. I think maybe you need to send me the name of that. I think the next training class I teach, I may want to use that as an example, a video example.
I'll take a note to include that after we're done talking. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Great example. Great example. Again, Kung Fu Panda, also a great example that can be used for how Shisu teaches and, the confidence in yourself, imposter syndrome, the things that you have to think in your own head, how you have to frame. Just another, you can view Kung Fu Panda, all 47 versions of it, or however many they've had sequels. Every single one of them has some really great leadership lessons right along the lines of what you're saying.
This is a crazy story, but Kung Fu Panda is such a random thought. I went to a wrestling camp growing up that was from the team that won the national championship, and one of the members of the team, the athletes were part of the counselors and stuff like that. And probably the only quote I remember was he was kind of having a conversation off the side. He goes, if you think that you'll win or you think you'll lose, either way you're right. He goes, but the thing that you have to get over is fear of losing. He goes, find the most attractive girl if you're single and you don't have a girlfriend or whatever it is, person. Ask them to go see Kung Fu Panda with you at the movie theater as a first date. Don't say anything else. And if they say yes, look at that. You just had a crazy experience with success. And if they say no, guess what? You don't have anyone to blame but me, because that's a ridiculous thing to ask a 17 or 18-year-old to want to go see. And it's like either way, it was a win, right? And, I mean, I personally, having a daughter myself, would love to watch Kung Fu Panda with her now. But I know myself in high school, and maybe Rachel, you, before you met your spouse and had kids, maybe at 18, if someone asked you that, you'd be like, what the heck? But to them, the exposure therapy of opening yourself up for absurdity or rejection, or there's something to it. I think that homework was so weird, and I did it, and this girl looked at me like, you're crazy. And I was like, oh, I'm still alive, like, because I have the fallback from the gift of the advice. And it's like, that wasn't me. I was just following orders. And I think there's something to it with trading.
I think there's something to it. I mean, this is probably way too much information, but my husband, so it worked, but my husband, our first date, he says that he had been on a gazillion first dates, and he was like tired of the games that people play. So I'm a big supporter of your technique. He decided that he was going to ask me to this like really restaurant where like they don't give you silverware and it's not around anymore. And it was not like an ethnic restaurant. It was like where, in their culture, you're eating with your hands. This was a restaurant, not a fancy restaurant, but he's like, I wanted to break down all the barriers. He's like, I just wanted to see what somebody would be like when they were not being given silverware, and like you just have to like get dirty, get messy on the very first date. And I can't believe I went back for a second date. I mean, but we had a blast, and it really did. Like when you can laugh at yourself,
I know,
whether in a personal situation or in a professional situation, when you take your work seriously, but not yourself so seriously, those are my people. And you know what? If that's not good for you, then you're not my person. And that's how he felt. And I guess I was, down home enough to get dirty.
I love that story. And what it feels like the theme is thinking of ways to take the ego out of the equation.
Yeah.
Right? Because laughter is a great way. I think it's a universal language. Like it's one of the best medicines.
Right. That's why we started off talking, and like, I'm not the HR police. That is just not what I do. I can't take it I take it seriously, but laughing gets way, way more impactful results than coming, it's the whole stick or carrot. I would much rather give a carrot and laugh about it and for people to be motivated than for people to work in fear. It's just not a great strategy. And it's the exact same thing, no matter how you look at it in your, like, the story of the restaurant like I would much rather find out fast whether you're somebody who's my person can get down and dirty.
I'm going to go on the other side of this equation, though.
Yeah.
What are some experiences or stories or maybe heuristics, things that you have in mind that tell you when it's time to walk away? That's not a good fit, right? Because I think that's sometimes one of the hardest things with entrepreneurs and business owners is they keep giving chances and they hold on to the wrong person or the wrong seat for that person for too long because they hope maybe it'll get better. And I don't think hope's a strategy. So what are some strategies you identify to determine if they're a red flag or a green flag?
It's a great question. As someone who had a really the real thing that got me into entrepreneurship was being in the wrong job. And I personally, I'll never know whether it was the wrong job. I thought it was my dream job, but whether it was the wrong job, the wrong people, the wrong time, the wrong company, I don't know, or whether I was just wrong. I don't know what the actual answer is, but I would never want anyone to get to the place where I was, which was could barely get out of bed, was crying on a regular basis. That's not me. That's not my personality. Let's not even talk about how much, physical outcomes, weight loss, hives, skin issues that I was having in a very short period of time. I mean, that's when you really know.
That's like a spiritual allergic reaction.
Yeah. Oh, that is what I'm going to call it from now on.
I never thought of that before right now, but take it. It's yours.
It was a spiritual allergic reaction. We don't want anybody getting to that place. I learned an awful lot. I would never want anybody else to have to learn it the way that I learned it. And frankly, I'm thrilled now looking back because I'm in the right place for me. But let's flip it back to the real question that you asked. As a business owner, as a business leader, I really think one of the most beneficial uses of your time is thinking about hiring slowly, firing fast. I don't mean hiring slowly does not mean taking your time, having a long drawn out interview experience. What it means is really thinking not just about the job description and the job duties, the tasks that someone's going to be required to do, but really you need to take the time to think about what success looks like in that job. That's what you need to be interviewing for. That you can teach skills. It is much more difficult to teach behaviors, and not saying it's impossible, but it is much more difficult. And so really taking the time up front to think about what is it that it's going to take for someone to be successful in this role, communicating that to the person. This is not top secret. It doesn't get put in the vault. This is something that you share freely and frequently with the individual in the role, what it's going to take to be successful. And you've got to be checking in on a very regular basis. And the first time that's something that you've got that pit in your stomach to be like, this just might not be right, that's when you have to have the first conversation. It's not to say, my goodness, my hair's on fire, everything's falling apart around us. But calling out and identifying, this is what I need to see more of, or I'm having some concerns, or I'm not sure about this, and let's get realigned. That is the key. And what business leaders often are challenged by, and I'm often kind of feeling like I'm poking the bear to be like, okay, it's not just this employee. Everyone else around them is wondering, why aren't you taking action? Why aren't you doing something? Why are they being held to a different standard? So you really have to think about the full ramifications of holding on to someone for too long. Yes, be kind. Yes, all of those other things for that individual, but also most often it's the leader's own ego to say, I can fix this. I didn't make a bad hire from the beginning. Go ahead. I see you. I see you jumping through your screen.
No, that last one was just so point because it's the difference between the ego and the not. Because some people will just refuse to say they made a bad decision
Yeah,
because then it hurts their feelings. But
exactly.
it's like everyone makes a mistake, and I think one of the things that you mentioned that was something I never thought about because if you're in hiring, you probably at some point or I've heard the phrase, fire fast, hire slow. But people think of that in time, in days. Like, oh, we need 90 days from the first communication to the hiring. Like,
That's
but
not
what
what
you
I'm
said
talking about at
is the
all.
opposite. You said you need to spend more time on identifying what characteristics that person must have, what skills, not just the job description, but like what does success look like in 30 days, 90, a year? Where will that person be in 5 years? What's their flight plan? Like that to me is different than a timeline calendar. That's being super intentional and having a high degree of fact finding for what that needs to be. And then if you find the right person, they don't need to jump through 12 hoops. They might have to go through a 1 or 2 or 3 step process because when you know, you know. And on the other end of it, for firing fast, it doesn't mean they make a mistake once and you just fire them. Obviously, compliance could
Right.
dictate,
Okay.
but
All
most of the
caveats
time,
in place.
right? But most of the time, I think what you're saying, in which I need to learn, I think everyone needs to relearn, is you shouldn't be upset about unmet expectations that are uncommunicated. So you're essentially resetting and iterating and communicating expectations. Hey, stop right there. As soon as we see something that wasn't what we wanted, we're going to reset the communication, recommunicate what our expectation is, and tell you where the gap was between. Then however many iterations, but like as long as you've done that to a degree of, you did your best to be kind. But if someone makes the same mistake 5 times in a week, you probably know that's time to fire fast, right?
Yeah.
I think that's
Million
a frame.
examples. Yeah. It's a shift.
Well, one of the hardest experiences that I had to learn was when I worked in private equity and mergers acquisitions, and how there's that phrase again: the bigger they are, the harder they fall. But when some founders exit and sell their business and they're no longer the acting president, they're no longer the owner, they're no longer the head honcho, they might experience some sort of identity just void, right? What do I do with my hands? My attachment to my work, which was taking so much of my identity, is no longer there. And there's other experiences within M&A, but like that's one that stands out to me. What are some things that you've seen in your experience about people strategy and mergers and acquisitions and these transition periods that need to be talked about?
The bankers are going to get the best funding. The lawyers are going to write the most incredible deal terms ever. The brokers are going to find the right folks. And at the end of the day, who's left? It's the human beings that actually work there. So if your due diligence process does not include how are decisions made here? Who can make those decisions? How do we reward and recognize people? How do we communicate when things are not going to plan? All of the how do we and how do they and how do we come together is that marriage. It really is a marriage of people and personalities. And there's no there's no deal term that you can write that takes away the pain if your cultures are not aligned. And so, I mean, I'm working with clients on a regular basis to peel back the onion of what the culture is. How engaged are their employees? How satisfied are they about working here? What may or may not be the sacred perks, benefits, beliefs of working here that if we change, we're going to be at risk for a mass migration. And far too many organizations don't spend the time to understand those things. And then they're quite surprised and shocked when it doesn't all come together. Even though the leaders may get along great, They may say the right things, but if you're not scratching beyond the surface, scratching beyond what a marketing person may have written about your organization and really understanding how the employees experience the workplace, you're in for a world of hurt.
It's like what you said just from the hiring process too, where
Yeah.
you mentioned that it goes beyond the job description. And that job description in this instance is the deal terms, it's the financing, the funding, it's the broker with the right prospect, being a recruiter. No, it's what does success look like and how do we communicate it? Right? Like that's something that the lawyers aren't in charge of, that the bankers aren't in charge of, that the brokers aren't in charge of. Being a good steward of your organization and really of caring about people is is saying how do we define success and how do we get there before the M&A thing. Where does everyone fit into it, right? Because the most heartbreaking thing is, I think, when someone thinks that success looks like one way, it's I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, but there's a
You're going there. Yep.
like I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, but the harsh reality is you're going to do like 10% of what you've been doing, and 90% is going to be completely a behavioral change, and they might not be ready to take that kind of drastic, sharp left hand turn. It's heartbreaking.
The number of organizations that don't actually have discussions about change theory, methodologies for change, communicating change, that they don't build the resiliency muscle, that people don't have academic knowledge of what change is astounding to me, because people have a much harder time talking about it if they don't have the language, common language to use. I mean, these, to me, look, to me, this is so common sense, but that's because of how, like, what my work experience is.
Right.
The reality is, most business owners, they're not living there every single day. They have like whatever their area of expertise is. And yes, being a people leader is part of their job, but unfortunately, it's a lot of people say it's the most challenging part of their job, or the part that they like the least. The number of times I get asked, "Oh my God, I don't know how you do what you do." And not in like a complimentary sort of way, but like the reality is, business owners, business leaders, they need someone on their team that's thinking about this from the outset. Because as you said, your banker's not doing it, your lawyer's not doing it, nobody's coming in. Your marketing person is probably looking at it from a branding perspective and from an external client customer perspective. And it can't, most often, it's not your day-to-day HR professional,
It's not
because
your compliance HR
it's
specialist.
definitely not your compliance HR
Nope.
professional. They're great at like comparing benefits to benefits.
Yeah.
And, there are some amazing, incredible performers. But unless you've been through a number of mergers and acquisitions, you don't know what you don't know. You need an expert to help you.
Well put.
Yeah.
Going to piggyback.
Okay.
Speaking of, you don't know what you don't know. If you can think about a time when you were in school, maybe that was elementary school, maybe you were 8 years old, 12 years old, but you were younger, and you started thinking about your future. Whatever the age was that you decided, I want to be X when I grow up, or I want to do X or Y as a vocation. What are some of the things that you would tell that person, knowing what you know now and seeing the things you've seen? Not saying you regret anything, you change the future, but what are some of the life lessons that would really, and assuming that person would take the feedback?
Right. Younger Rachel probably would not have, but I don't, and this has come up recently, the last time my family was all together. We could not come up with what happened between I want to be a ballerina. I want to ride unicorns for a living, like that phase of my life, and like a much more college, post-college phase. I don't know what happened to my career aspirations in between, and nobody in my family remembers. But the reality is, I think what I would tell myself at whatever age is, don't let anyone else tell you what you can or can't do. Um, there's this may be a female thing, the way that women of my age were raised, it certainly is much more empowering. And I had great parents who really encouraged me to be anything and everything I would have or could have ever wanted to be. But there still are norms that are, you should be within this box. You should be doing something like this. And I think I wanted to be a good girl, and I wanted to do what was expected of me. And I wanted to, follow and be successful, follow the path. I didn't know what the path was. I just think that I would, and this kind of goes back to the take everything with a grain of salt, is I think I would just tell myself, not everybody has your best interest at heart. Not everybody knows you, like the real you deep down. And listen to yourself. Trust yourself. There'll be lots of hard times. There'll be lots of things that did not go the way that I would have wanted. But trust your gut, because you're the only one that can write your story. And I think I probably listened and tried to stay in line, tried to be black and white when I was definitely gray for a little too long.
Amen. I believe the hardest person's respect to earn is oneself. And if you keep that in mind and you earn your own self-respect versus trying to get the approval from others, you will have the freedom to be who you are and probably live up to your potential. But if you don't take steps to earn your self-respect, you might have an allergic reaction within the spirit.
Spiritual allergic reaction.
Maybe.
Yes.
Man, that feedback, it rings true to me in several instances too, where I'm just doing what's expected, and why do I feel so bad about it? Why am I gaining weight and stressed out all the time and this and that? And it's like, oh, because I'm not doing what I expected myself. If I'm being honest,
Right.
I'm doing what others expected me, and it sucks.
It's not right for me.
Well, for those that appreciate Rachel's vibe and want to be part of her tribe, how can people listening get in touch and learn more and follow you?
Absolutely. I am on LinkedIn regularly. Rachel Platt, 2 T's in Platt. Also, you can find me at my website, PLATTinum Consulting. PLATTinum is spelled also with 2 T's, like my last name. And you can schedule a meeting straight from there. Would love to chat with anyone. And I also really, Ross, my favorite expression that I'm using these days is, your vibe helps find your tribe. I just heard it for the first time a couple of months ago, and I have put it into my regular everyday use. So I'm glad you used it.
Well, everyone listening, I hope that this vibe attracts you. And if not, hey, that's great. But if it did, my only ask is you share it with a friend, because we want to keep the tribe of having these conversations to help reach your optimum potential. And I think, Rachel, I want to thank you so much. You're truly an amazing person. You're a kind soul. You're just a beautiful person. Thank you so much. And everyone, thank you so much for listening. And I just hope that you take with this nuggets or feedback, or even if it's just encouragement, that you can be who you are. I only ask that you be well. And thank you again, Rachel.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.